we get to something that's quite interesting, and it has to do with our friends at Hasbro. Uh, they are reviving their Tiger Electronics LCD game brand uh, for modern audiences. Now, for those that don't remember, Tiger Electronics created portable gaming on the cheap. And it was
really cheap.
And it was for poor people, essentially. They couldn't afford a Game Boy, but you could spend, I don't know, like 10, 15 bucks on a video game that you could take with you on the go. And I say video game in the very loosest sense of the term.
Think like Game & Watch.
Game & Watch had more interactivity and technology than these things. Essentially what it is, it's just a small screen.
Mm-hmm.
You had a handle and you had controls on the left and the right.
And the controls were usually terrible.
And the controls made no sense. You had a D-pad on the left and on the right. Maybe you'd have two lines. Maybe you'd have
sometimes you'd have the D-pad on the right.
Maybe you'd have two D-pads. Maybe you just have a button, one single button on the side.
Like the Aladdin one has a left and right button and like two buttons on the right side.
So, and this is essentially an old-fashioned calculator screen blown up. It was an LCD screen. No, not an LCD screen. Sorry, it was was it LCD? I don't think. I'm not sure the exact technology, but it was early stuff. LED. And so
LCD games were Tiger.
Yeah, and they would send an electrical charge when you pressed a button through the screen, and a certain pixel would light up, and the entire game was on that screen. And when something happened, it would activate and you would see it. And it was real bad. It was like I had Street Fighter on it. It was real bad.
I had Sonic the Hedgehog 3 and Sonic the Hedgehog.
They're all bad. None of them were any good. Bad. The only ones that are playable today or then were some of the sports games. Some of the very basic of basic games, like the bowling game I had worked.
Mm-hmm.
Pinball sort of kind of worked, but there was no physics, right? So you could know what was happening. Baseball worked to an extent because all you had to do was hit and kind of move everyone. It was essentially the NES game baseball, like transfer down. Yeah. That was really it. Soccer didn't work because there was no motion on the screen. You couldn't go left and right.
No.
And funny enough, about 2 or 3 years ago, me and a roommate of mine actually almost launched a Kickstarter to bring back some of these, the Tiger handheld things for fun, to license like films and stuff as a project and release kind of new handhelds with this as promotional stuff. And that ended up falling through, and now Tiger's doing it, which is hilarious. But just, these were all bad. Everyone had them. Kids would be like passing them around at recess because they were so disposable. All the battery compartments were missing on every single one of them. Yeah. And you even if you had a Game Boy, chances are you had a couple of these, because these were like in the era of like the Wii, these were grandma gifts. And totally. in the era of the Wii, your grandparents would go like to Target or Walmart in the bargain bin of like $20 Switch or Wii games that are just shovelware.
Game.
Yeah, it's like, oh, cool, Elf Bowling the game, or Anubis 2. This looks neat. Just the shit games you would get, or like
horses.
Yes, Imagine Design or something stupid like that that were $20 and you would get on Christmas or your birthday. Before that, before there was shovelware, there was Tiger Electronics, which were all shovelware.
This was the serial numbers filed off, not quite Disney movie.
Yes, and
that grandma would get you.
And the problem was that everybody wanted these because somehow Tiger had the licenses, and of course they got the licenses because they use the same shell in every goddamn machine, and they didn't have to do anything. They just had to move some pixels around on a screen that were already made.
Well, I mean, I dropped into the article like just an entire video full of their commercials, and they would
sell them hard, like you were playing the Switch.
This is the greatest thing ever.
And there was filmed like you were playing a goddamn Nintendo Switch quality stuff.
Like,
but they had everything.
The early ones, they're like, some people will go to any lengths to bring their video games with, and they have some kid
like
wheeling an entire arcade cabinet,
and then some kid no.
He's got like a monitor and all this shit strapped to his body.
None of these games came close to anything, uh, even close to Atari level of gameplay quality.
Not even
Not
close.
not even close. But everyone had them because they were fucking cool as shit. You had like the X-Men, and they always had fantastic art, like Sonic. Yeah. They had like Sega franchises. Shinobi was on there and stuff.
They had Mega Man.
Capcom, Mega Man had stuff on there. Street Fighter 2. This was like, I played Street Fighter 2 on Tiger handheld before I got it on my Super Nintendo.
Was it more like Street Fighter 1?
It was more like the game is still being released on shitty Chinese knockoff things. It's flea markets. You just throw your fist in the air. You can only select two people. And the Hadouken was literally your character's hands leaving their body and pixels to hit someone, and it never fucking worked. And I loved it, and I would buy them today, but they're all fucking expensive. You want to know what Tiger Electronic games were? Just watch the AVGN video on Tiger Electronics to see them in action. And the commercials were killer. Remember, this is before the internet. This is before you knew what a game was. Like today, you can see something and be like,
that looks like shit.
Google something. It's like, I don't know about that. Google. And you'll see 100 videos on YouTube blasting something or loving something. Or you could read an article. You know what I mean? You could read a review online somewhere. Back in the day, all you had was commercials. Or GamePro magazine. And the magazines didn't fucking touch Tiger Electronics.
Nope.
None of them did. So you had no idea how these games played or looked or anything outside of that 30-second commercial. And I think my most famous Tiger Electronic that I still think I have in a box somewhere is the Bo Jackson one. And I think that might have been their biggest seller at the time, because Bo Jackson was like huge at the time. And he went from football. He was a football player who was in Tecmo Bowl, the greatest character in Tecmo Bowl, to play baseball. And so the handheld that I got was Bo Knows, and it was two-sided, top and bottom. And there was baseball on the top and football on the bottom. And all you had to do was flip it with the same controls inverted, and you could play one game of football and one game of baseball. And they were both shitty, but it was the coolest thing ever. And you had stuff like Batman. Every movie had a Tiger Electronic game because this was the shovelware of the time. And like, go see some of these commercials. These kids are jumping off their beds and outside like leather jackets. Be like, yeah, I just beat it.
Coolest.
Yeah. And nobody was cool. It was just a bunch of dorks playing X-Men. And we're talking about games that didn't have beginnings, middle, or ends. You turned it on, you hit start, and you had about maybe 30 seconds of gameplay. Mm-hmm. Maybe, if you're lucky. You go up, down, left, right.
And then it gets harder.
And then it just gets harder an attack. And no, some of these things didn't even have like life bars or scores or anything. They were terrible. And they are the quintessential like early 90s nostalgia for me. These are it. Some of these games literally had just two buttons, one on the left, one on the right, that did one thing. One may have moved you, one may have jumped. That's it. Disney was on these. Mm-hmm. They had one for every Disney film. McDonald's released Tiger Electronic handhelds in Happy Meals. Like the mini ones for like Sonic the Hedgehog stuff. Like they released them everywhere. And no one ever knew how to play any of them.
No.
Nobody ever knew because no one talked about them outside of anything. So them being back is really interesting. Some of them are really expensive and hard to find, and this, that, and the other. Well, but these were
all disposable
because they were disposable and thrown away. And even today, it's like I looked for some a couple of years back, and I was like, "Oh man, I really want Street Fighter 2 because I don't have that one anymore." It's like $40-$50. I'm like, "Holy shit!"
I'm not paying that much for that.
And these things were everywhere. They were in KB Toys, Toys R Us. They were in like shopping malls. They were in everywhere. They were like in truck stops. You could see them hanging because they were so prevalent and easy and cheap. But nowadays, they don't pop up at like thrift stores or flea markets or like Goodwill. You don't see Tiger Electronic things on the shelf because of how disposable they were, even though there were millions out there.
Yeah.
And
they're all in a landfill somewhere.
You don't see like collectors groups for them. You don't see them even being sold at like video game stores that specialize in like retro stuff. People had these, but they fucking hated them. Nobody liked them. Right? I think that's like you would have one and you would take it on like a family trip that's like 2 hours long and you'd be like beep boop boop beep boop. Your parents would yell at you because you couldn't cut off the sound on there because there was no slider.
Yeah.
Boop, 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 boop. 15 minutes into the car ride, you were done. You just said, "Fuck it, I really want a Game Boy."
I mean, you'd have the same problem if you had a Game Gear because
Yes, and you'd just be
sucked
dead.
down battery like fucking crazy. But,
So, as Brian wrote about it, and you can read it online, GabbatMag.com. Link is in the description of this whole article too. Hasbro is really banking on nostalgia because that's really big right now in all terms.
mhm.
And this isn't the first thing we've seen, right? Tamagotchi a couple of years ago released again, and it was huge, right? To the point where I bought one for a girlfriend at the time who loved it, and then I bought one for myself as well because I remember those things, and they were fairly cheap. I think it was like $12 or something for a mini one. And so, but those were like disposable in a sense, but they still were like more culturally relevant than Tiger Electronic handhelds. Like Tamagotchi was of its time that changed the world. Everyone had one.
Mhm.
There was like even Peter Molyneux. There's a story that Peter Molyneux had a Tamagotchi who he played and used so much that his staff like dunked it in his coffee one morning, and he came back and he was just devastated that it was dead, and it like led into the creation of like Black and White and stuff like that.
I mean,
They banned them at my school. Like Tamagotchis were banned at school. Tiger Electronic handhelds never were, even though we all had them. But Tamagotchis, and I remember like middle school, like they were banned outright. Like you can't do this. There was like fights on the playground about it.
I mean, Digimon got started with the same sort of thing.
Yes, same thing. I had.
Like I remember the commercials. They're like, you can link these up. They're like
I have mine.
Tamagotchi, but
I have my Agumon. It was like a little brick
link
wall.
them up and fight. Yeah,
it was like a tiny square brick wall. I remember getting it for Christmas, and loving the shit out of that thing. So they're back. You can pre-order them right now at GameStop, which GameStop is literally falling apart at the seams right now. They've been punking themselves.
Like LCD games. So.
They're falling apart. Like there's some leaked information that came out where they're pressuring their salespeople just to make a sale any which way possible for anything. And there was the article a couple of weeks ago where there was some sale at some GameStops that were closing, and they listed online which stores were closing. And major cities have 4 or 5 GameStops. Even smaller cities probably have 2, on either sides of town. And so there's an article where some guy walked in, wanted an Xbox One, and they said, well, we'll sell it to you for, $125 or something on sale, like just boxed, like everything. It's like, oh, that's a good deal. So he buys one. He goes to the GameStop, which is only a few miles away, right on the way home. He's like, oh, maybe I'll pick up some games, extra stuff. Anyways, realizes that the trade-in value for the Xbox is like $150 or something. And he bought it for some stupid price, like $90 used or something. Mm-hmm. And so he ends up going back to the other GameStop, buys out their entire stock of Xbox Ones, goes to the other GameStop on the other side of town, sells them back, and makes like a $900 profit because they're so inept. And like then he got on Reddit and people were like, what the fuck? And then other people started to do it. They would buy these stuff. They would buy it at closing because GameStop listed all the stores that were closing. And there was like only one in California, so it wasn't near me. But all people would go and buy their like consoles, buy them out because the store was closing and they had to get rid of them. So they were buying like Xbox Ones and PS4s for like $90 and then selling them back to the other GameStop for like $150 profit. And they were fucking eating their own tails at this point. Like, okay, you're closing, get rid of all your games, but there's a fucking store in town. Why don't you just ship all your consoles over there, you dummies? Company's falling apart. Anyways, back to Tiger Electronics. They've announced their plan on releasing 4 games right now. And they're good titles. Some of these that I do remember having. So I venture to assume they're exact same and they're not going to mess with them. They're like the Tamagotchi remakes of recent. There's a Little Mermaid.
More inspired by than direct, but mostly.
Hopefully, we'll see if it's what screens they use or whatever. They have the Little Mermaid, which I do remember. My sister had that one because that was her favorite film. There's Sonic the Hedgehog 3, which Brian already had. Go pick that up. Transformers Generation 2, don't know anything about that one.
Yeah, I don't remember that one.
which might be interesting to pick up then because I didn't have it. And there's X-Men Project X. I remember an X-Men game. There was probably a couple. You know what I mean? There's a couple.
Oh, yeah.
They released a bunch of stuff. So I think I may have had this X-Men game. I'm not sure. Looking at the screens on the article we have up, it does look pretty familiar, like the X-Men games on Sega Genesis, where you just kind of side scroll and shoot with your power. And I think it was just Cyclops, and I think Wolverine's on the other side or something. But
Yeah.
what's interesting to note about these is they're very cheap looking and cheap.
Oh.
They're $14.99 a piece, which in today, I figured they'd be at least $20 or up. I don't know the size, if they're going to be shrunk down at all, like the new Tamagotchi were. And again, you said they'll be more inspired than a direct one-to-one release. So
Yeah.
I sense they're going to be smaller because the new Tamagotchi eggs were quite a bit smaller. I think the screen might have been the same size, but the outer stuff was smaller. They're not going to be good. These are going to be collector's items for fun. I might get the X-Men one. I would have if they had Street Fighter, but they don't. It looks like they clearly don't have that license. But remember when we talked about how each Tiger Electronic console looks the same, but the controls were different? Like some had 2 D-pads, one had maybe a button. Sometimes it was only one bar across the side, right? It was always different. These sets are all exactly the same. There's a D-pad on the left and 2 kind of oblong buttons on the right, which has like a right to left and a call button. The designs are exactly the same. So it's super cheap on this. And that's not necessarily a knock because they probably chose these. Cheap. They were super cheap. They probably chose these titles because of name recognition. Clearly, everyone knows the X-Men, Transformers, and Sonic.
Well, I mean, Transformers, they own outright, Hasbro.
Yeah, Hasbro. And they're all big. These are all big releases that people would get. But the shells themselves are the most basic of Tiger LED's games that go back to like 89. I doubt kids today, like you said, are going to give a shit about any of these, which is probably why they're releasing them through like GameStop or something. I'm sure they'll be on Amazon or something. This is actually something that I would expect to see at like San Diego Comic-Con. You know what I mean? Like one of those exclusive releases for hardcore people at a certain like a convention. That said, your local GameStop's probably going to go out of business soon. So when these launch, you'll probably be able to snag them for $2 or $3. So how this all ties together. You're probably going to get a real good deal on these things. So when they release, wait a little bit because your store's going to close and then you can pick it up, buy 3 or 4, sell them back to the other GameStop. So let us know in the comments below. Did you play these Tiger handhelds back in the day? Which ones did you have? Did you actually think they were good? They're not good. Let us know what you think and how many of these you're going to pick up.